My coworker Mason will be recording this webinar so that you can all access it later on our website. So I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Lauren. Our guest speaker today's name is Maya, and my coworker, her name is Mason. We want to thank you all for coming to this webinar. It's a larger part of a series hosted by the Ventura Resource Conservation District and the Ventura County Wildfire Collaborative. The collaborative offers regular education and outreach events such as this one through funding from our sponsors CAL FIRE and California Climate Investments. Our mission includes educating Ventura County residents on the impacts of wildfire and how to access resources and prepare. As many of us know, California has a very rich history with fire. Prior to our recent paradigm of destructive megafires that we know of today, California and much of North America was positively shaped by the responsible use of fire by our indigenous communities, in which I'd like to recognize the unceded Chumash land that we currently reside on. Today, we're going to be hosting writer and biologist Maya Khosla, who will walk us through her presentation today called Are We Fire Wiser? Maya Khosla has evacuated from her home twice during recent Sonoma wildfires. As Sonoma County Poet Laureate, she brought Sonoma's communities together to heal through gatherings, field walks, and shared writing after the recent wildfires. Her books include All the Fires of Wind and Light in the 16 Rivers Press and Keelbone, which is in the Bear Star Press and received the Dorothy Brunsman Poetry Prize. Working with colleagues, she recently documented the astoundingly abundant regeneration of giant sequoias after wildfire, and her recent awards include the 2023 Fund for Wild Nature Grassroots Activist Award, 2020 Environmentalist of the Year Award, and the 2020 Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award. Her work has been featured in For the Wild and the film Elemental, Reimagine Wildfire, and she wrote for award-winning documentary films, which includes Village of Dust, City of Water, about water crisis in rural India. With that, I would love to introduce Maya to get started about the presentation, Are We Fire Wiser?
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, Mason, for sort of organizing and formatting this amazing webinar format. And I want to share my screen, and there's two ways to do this, so I'm going to try first. We've already tried to figure out if there's another way.
I also like to mention that there is room for Q&A. So if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A box or the chat box below, and we will get to it towards the end of this webinar.
Yeah, so let me see. I'm going to just... can you see one slide? Just want to make sure.
We see it of multiple slides, not in presentation view.
Okay, let's try this again real quick. I'm gonna go, sorry, give me a second. If this doesn't work, then I'm gonna, all right. Then I will ask for you, if it doesn't work, it did work the last time, but I will ask you, Mason, to do this. Okay. Do you see a slide, a single slide right now?
It's still showing us the whole format.
Okay. All right. So go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. The same.
I think this, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, so thanks so much. Thank you. Yeah, I've come to this because I've evacuated twice during the Sonoma fires, and I want to talk especially about them, but also I've come to this topic because I've seen a lot of things happening in the wild. So I'm trying to, I've spent quite a few years figuring out the space, the homes front and the wild front, and how the two things are working or not working together. And so these little question marks here on the slide indicate all the items that I've seen and paid attention to, especially with some of the heroes in this field, who include Jack Cohen, who's probably walked from house to house to house, standing or not standing, after and before wildfire, and done this for decades, for thousands of houses, and Alexander Seifert. And each of the question marks leads to something they've been talking about for years. And I want to focus on success stories. Of course, there are stories that are not success stories as well, but I definitely feel like, especially as someone who's a homeowner and is interested in getting a very fire safe home, I'm interested in these questions that all these people are asking. So next slide. Thanks. So where should the main focus be? So this is impressive. 40,000 homes. I don't think anyone else other than Alexander Seifert and John Keeley has ever studied 40,000 homes. Some survived, some didn't. And then they did this whole analysis. I kind of wish they had more detail on it in this publication, which you can easily get or find online. But they got some really important things down about the home structural factors. So there was this 5-foot sacred space that they noticed was extremely important in all the homes that remained standing after experiencing wildfire. No immediately surrounding vegetation, no overhang, nothing touching the roof. They also noticed irrigation was really important. If somebody happened to have irrigation and they were wetting down the soil around their home, they noticed the amount of exposed eaves, vents, single pane windows were definitely a big risk factor. Roof materials, we've all heard about roof materials. Something that was stockpiled nearby, access to for the egress for people who own the home so that they can leave, and then for firefighters. So those were the important things. And then the critical zone, which is really interesting to me, which is mentioned in some defensible space posters that I see, but not in all of them, is the 0 to 5 feet. They said that is absolutely critical. It was the nothing here zone. It was the absolute, if it's a rock wall, if it's rock around, that was big. And then there was this intermediate zone, 5 to 30 feet, and defensible space, which we've all heard, 100 feet, but additional over 100 feet, there was no additional benefit in these 40,000 homes. They got them this data set from Northern and Southern California. So it was true of all these places. So to me, that was really interesting as a homeowner, that was really interesting. Next slide. Yeah, so and Jack Cohen is another person. He was in US Forest Service for, I guess, decades, and that was all he was studying is, sort of shooting flames on fronts of homes to see what caught, what didn't catch. And if you see the videos that I've sent out, he walks from house to house. He picks up a piece of fencing. He'll pick up a little swing set. He'll talk about every little piece of something where a home was saved or not. So it's astounding. So I was sort of followed his work quite a lot. And it's classic because he did some of the first studies on which everything is based. Like everything we hear is based on that right now. So I'm fascinated by all of the videos that I can find. And of course, a lot of these things you've already heard about. This is all, stuff that everybody hears about. But what was really interesting is he says it's not the big things, it's the little things. And you can see in that list, I'm not going to go through the whole list. Oh, I added sprinklers on rooftop, by the way, because that's more like an Australian like practice. And I found in Sonoma County, there's a story about Sonoma County that I'm going to share that was a success story. All right, next slide. And so back again, staying with Jack Cohen for a little while, he says, if huge organizations can't control the fire, how is it somehow I can do something to my house to keep it from burning down? And that's when he talks about the little things. It's the really small things that matter. Even a broom leaning against the wall. Just every little thing. And so there's another list there that, of course, everybody knows about. I know we're all too familiar with screens on vents and anything that's a little litter and all that. But, he just pays so much special attention to it. So I had that list over there. And of course, what's cool is, which is something my friends, when they rebuilt after the Sonoma fire, they had to rebuild, and they didn't realize that, an outbuilding really next to the house is the house. As far as fire is concerned, it's the house. It's continuous. So that's something I've noticed in Jack Cohen's work, which is interesting to me. Next slide. And okay, now we're going to Sonoma. So success stories, I found some success stories, and so I started going from like friend to friend, and people spreading the word, right? So here's one of the success stories, and it's very much textbook according to what we hear about things that we need to do to keep a home hardened. And there's these people are still in the process of cleaning up a little bit, because, and you can see a little garbage in the front, garbage trash bag or whatever. But yeah, there's still a process, but they're kind of really, really meticulous people. So I thought I'll visit them. Next slide. Yeah, this is another one. Here we go again. Same old, same set of cool new provisions for the home. The only thing they weren't happy with is, I think there was wood in the stairs, and they were like, oh, I think we want to change that. They were in the process of designing, and this area was part of the 2017 Sonoma fires, which is where I evacuated. Those were the big fires that came to Sonoma. Next slide. You're seeing the same thing over and over again, is that clear space right around the home. And then, of course, it's not like they have nothing further out. They have trees, they have all the ingredients of a nice landscaping, but really close up to the home, there's nothing. Next slide. Yeah, so this one, it's sort of interesting because here we go. We've got, it's not necessarily that the tree is gonna be, it looks like it's next. It's about, in actual fact, if you look around this tree, it's about 7 feet from the house. So it's not right up front of the, like right on top of the house or anything, the way it looks right now. So next slide. Okay, here's Glassfire. And this person, and I don't want to go too close to his home because, he wanted me to stay a little further away so that it wouldn't be recognized. But it was one of the cool success stories of the Glassfire, because you look at it. Okay, so the Glassfire burned a lot of things. Now, this is right after the Glassfire, so you can see that the trees are singed, but he was so happy that most of those fir trees along his driveway are alive. Actually, you can now see a little green at the top, but they're alive. So he wanted to keep them in. But what's really key is both homes survived. He's got 2 homes, and he has resistant, metal roofs. He has clearing around each home. He said one little window was open in a shed next to the faraway home, and that shed burned, but the home didn't burn. That little shed burned. That was, to me, that was so interesting, that everything he did, everything textbook, and it all stayed standing. And the fire just came right up. You can see here in the foreground, the fire came right up. I mean, it was a kind of a crown fire for a lot of it. All right, next slide. Okay, this one is from Southern Cal, and it's from someone I know. And what's interesting here is this is the Creek Fire. It's a big success story because almost every single home here was standing after the fire. And so this is Chad Hansen's slide. And it's sort of interesting because there they had these strict laws and everything had to be implemented before, just as a mode of preparation. And so everything stayed, pretty much every home stayed standing in this stretch here. They were very, very prepared. So another success story. Next slide. Okay, so a Jack Cohen quote. Here we get into the WUI, the wildland urban interface, and then beyond, right? So he's saying the continued, in a recent publication, no, it's not recent, this is 2008, the continued focus on fire suppression to the exclusion of alternatives that address home ignition suggest an inappropriate framing of the wildland urban interface problem in terms of excluding fire. So in other words, the idea that like we're going to stop fires, which we can't, because of course, as the introduction to this talk shared, there's so so much fire in our history. There's indigenous fire, there's lightning fire, there's so much fire in our history that's really rich, and it cannot be stopped because this is land that had that tradition and history, that ecology. So everything's built around it. So the suppression part, or at least stopping it, is the fact that we're trying to put a lot of effort into that is a very hard place to go, because the success stories are all about having something done really close to the home. And I like this poster because I found this online. I'm trying to think of where I found it, but I like when people do that 0 to 5 feet emphasis, because I'm seeing that in the publications, especially Cypher's publication, the 0 to 5 feet sacred space. But I don't see it in all of the posters that I find online. Like, I don't see it in the Sonoma Defensible Space poster. I don't see it there's a Nevada County one. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I'll find that sometimes. Next slide. Yeah, so where's the current focus? So I think and here's a quote by Jack Cohen again, like, community fire destruction will grow as long as fire suppression and veg treatments are the primary approach. I mean, they can be a combo approach, but not the primary approach. And that's what that's where his emphasis is. There's a story from Sonoma, another story from Sonoma. There were two homes right next to each other right after the 2020 August complex fire. And these neighbors, one home didn't survive, and it was a good friend of mine, and the other one did. And the home that did survive, they actually had sprinklers and they had irrigation right around the home. So that again goes back to the idea that, really every story I hear that's a success story is about somebody who did something a little bit different in the immediate space around their home. All right, next slide. Yeah, so this is a slide that's a reminder to myself about where the fire suppression products end up going, which is, it's a shock to me that a lot, and this is a slide I got from Ralph Bloomers, who's up in Oregon, and he's one of the producers of the film called Elemental Reimagine Wildfire, which is a really amazing film that I recommend. But what he's saying here, and what the surveyors are saying here, is a lot of what is cut out of trees goes straight into the atmosphere to influence wildfire. Later, long-term climate changes because of emissions. So I just wanted to keep that reminder because I'm going to talk about that. Next slide. Yeah, so right after wildfire, there's a gut reaction of taking things out. And I think I remember this in Sonoma too, and for sure in Santa Cruz, is that any singed tree, even if it was in the process of recovering, and these are all redwoods here, was taken out sort of preemptively because of a sort of a fear factor that the trees caused the damage, when in fact they were alive. The houses were more flammable than them, so they were not actually as damaged. So it's a question, like, were they really right up against the house? But if they were far away, they probably didn't influence. If they were more than 100 feet away, they most likely did not influence the way the house reacted in these cases. Next slide. I'm getting to the nature part of this because here you're seeing a lot of trees that are very much in the process of epicormic branching. You can see that, and these are redwoods being taken down. They are singed, but what's interesting about redwoods resprouting like this is that 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, they look like regular redwoods. And that's something we've seen in Sonoma, and I've seen in Santa Cruz too. So taking it down, I mean, if it's within 100 feet, sure, I get it. Even limbing is fine too. But if it's beyond that, it doesn't seem to make that much difference. So it's, again, there's something that we need to talk about the carbon emissions as well. It's not like we can only talk about removals without talking about the carbon emissions, because the two things kind of happen side by side. Next slide. Yeah, so here's an example from Stanislaw National Forest of some of the removals we do as sort of a gut reaction because of fear, and that's where a lot of the funds go, is when you do an intact do thinning on an intact forest, it's counterintuitive. You think that it might burn less because it's got less fuels, but the problem with some of the thinning actions that are more mechanical is that it dries out the soil once the soil is dry. And of course, mechanical thinning does take out some mature trees as well. Once the soil is dry, if it's so dried out, it can experience high severity fire. And then after that, it's just a salvage logging operation. So it ends up going from intact to a clear cut within a progression of, sequence of events. Next slide. I've seen this also. I mean, this is, by the way, this is close to Paradise. So I actually did some field work there right after the fire. That was the campfire in 2018, I think. And it had the logging and replanting that was done. I think it looked really dry. When I was walking it looked really dry. And so what happens is there was some clear cuts after the 2008, I think it was called the Humboldt fire. It was 10 years before the campfire. So once that was done and they finished, they did a bunch of salvage logging and then replanting, but the soil was really dry. This is something I noticed over and over again. Soil really dry. Right here, sometimes really careful thinning, the soil retains the moisture. It's super careful. I've seen that in one example, but in Sonoma. But for the most part, it's dry soil, and then the fire comes through really quickly. Next slide. Yeah, so back to, this is the fate. This is the fate of the carbon from these clear cuts, especially now, which is something I'm studying, which is that they used, wood is being used to for power generation, biomass energy. So it's a new thing, or at least it seems more new. It's not new to California, but it's really growing in California right now. So that is like straight up emissions, like 100% emissions if it's being used for power generation. So that's something to keep in mind because that's a lot of emissions that are influencing climate change and fires. Next slide. Yeah, and this is a subject of a film I'm working on right now, is trying to understand the two sides of the biomass energy issue, which is, incineration of living and dead trees for power. There's a lot of carbon dioxide coming out of the stacks, actually more than if you burn coal. Sort of a shocker to me, you know. But for some reason, wood isn't as powerful in burning process, and so when it burns, it really, you need to burn more to generate the same amount of electricity. Next slide. Yeah, so okay, here's the other question I have, and I'm just posing it as a question because we have in Sonoma, Santa Cruz, and many Northern California places, we have a gut reaction where we've got to take care of the forest. So the forests are not behaving the way they did. And so that's where a lot of the focus is. And as of the last time I checked, it was most of the funds were going to that. And whether or not it helps, you can check it out fire to fire. A lot of fires that we've seen where the soil gets really dry after removals, you think you're really hoping the removals will work. But when the soil gets really dry after removals, that actually paces up the fires. I mean, you can look at fire progression data for like day-to-day fire progression data to check that out. It's kind of interesting. But should we be balancing the dollars on the home safety that really works versus the measures that are being done further than the home front, way out there, beyond miles or miles beyond homes, basically. Next slide. All right, so why are we thinking there's a lot of focus on these removals in removing dead trees? I would like to send you something that I did not have in my list. It just came to mind, which is Sarah Hart and others, many others actually, have done years and years of study on dead trees to see, did they burn more? Did they increase the fire spread? The answer is, surprisingly, they didn't. But then the question is, who's using these dead trees? What use are they? These are two California endangered great gray owl chicks. And sure enough, you see them using a snag. I just checked the snag a couple of weeks ago before leaving for India, which is where I am right now, and that snag was not standing anymore, so they probably have to find another spot this year. But this is the cool feature of snags. Here they are at the top of the snag, being raised, and both these chicks, it was successful. I found them later as well, once they had fledged. Next slide. Great parent. It's the mom. And yeah, you can see her right there in the burn, and she's actually hunting. So she's just turning around because I was somewhere in the vicinity and sort of sitting down about 75 feet away. I had a good zoom for this one. Next slide. So who else uses these dead trees? What's interesting is you got the primary cavity builders, which are the woodpeckers, and then everyone else comes in to use the spare, cavities that no one, some of them reject their own cavities. The cavities get old. They want to build a new one. The female's really picky. a lot of times she's the one who's choosing the cavity she wants to nest in. So the male will build a lot of cavities and some of them are not used. So here you go. A bluebird that can't make its own cavity is going to nest in there. Next slide. And here's the other interesting feature of snags, which is that very recently in Sequoia National Monument and Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Parks, all of these places, there were fires that went through in 2020 and 2021, big fires. And there were some areas that burned, like they call it high severity, where it's a crown fire and a lot of the trees die in the fire. You still see some stuff coming back at the tops of the trees when you go out a few years later, but lo and behold, these are giant sequoia seedlings and saplings doing really vigorous growing 2 years after in this case, this is the 2021 fire. I'm really shocked at how tall that is. I'm behind it, right? And that's not unusual. There were several like that. But of course, this is a fast grower. But the little ones that are coming up in the soil, year 2, year 3, unexpected. And I did some counts with some colleagues and went out there hiking with some friends. Astonishing regeneration after this wildfire. And this particular patch, you can see from the background, it did burn. That was a crown fire in the background. And so probably open it up so the soil is good. And wherever there's moisture, there's soil, there's sun, boom, there are the little young trees growing. Next slide. And that's the Castle Fire. And you can see, I went there in the winter, and you can see how the snowpack has sort of smushed the trees a little bit, but the little saplings are growing just fine. I went back in after it melted, and it just straightened right up and continued growing. And here it is. I would say it's a moderate burn. It was a half and half. It was pretty close to a creek. This really amazing regrowth here. Next slide. And who uses the snags when they fall? What's really interesting to me is it's sort of we build, trails and roads, and that's how we venture out in the wild, venture out in the wildlands, and that's how we enjoy that space. So I find so many, I've got like 22 remote cameras out in different locations, hidden in an area that experienced wildfire 1 to 15 years ago, or maybe even longer. And I'm just really interested to see who's using it, these post-fire habitats. And these snags that fall are like pathways. They're regularly used because I've never seen a study on this, but my theory is it offers the smaller animals like little mesocarnivores, it offers them a little lift off the ground so they're not as vulnerable. And right away, if something comes by, they can shoot up a tree. Like actually, gray foxes do that as a defense mechanism. They go up a tree really fast. Fishers do it too. Next slide. Here you go. This is a young fisher, and it's close to a creek. And this fallen snag is a spot where I think it's spent a little time. So I think it's that security that they're somewhat hidden in this case. Plus, it gives them, he's looking around, so it gives them a view again. I think the snag fall is also, of course, I've mentioned up there that it's stored forest carbon. I see it years and years later. It's melting into the soil, it's feeding the soil, and eventually merging. And 50 to 100 years from now, if it's left in place, you won't even see it. It's part of the soil. Next slide. Uh, this is a creature called the black-backed woodpecker, one of the best nest builders I've seen, other than pileated. Pileated builds amazing nests, and it's a phenomenal expert of burnt forest, and you can see how much from the black of this bag and the black of the tree that's charred, you can see how blended in it is. Of course, it's pretty much sticking out, where the trees all, where the bark's been lost, the charred bark's been lost. It sticks out. It's very prominent. But when it's in these charred trees, it's it's at home. It disappears in front of your eyes. I've seen it with binoculars. I see it fly in and it disappears because it's so well camouflaged. So this is a creature I studied quite a bit, and in fact, it was sort of fascinating to see that the female is very picky about the nest cavity. She goes in and shapes it when she decides, right? So she goes in, shapes it, and then he goes in and cleans up. I saw that over and over again, and then I came back hours later after conducting and completing a survey. Sure enough, they were still doing that. She went in, she was hammering around inside the cavity. I could hear her busy work in there. And she flies out, and the male comes in, goes into the cavity, takes a beak full of sawdust, and he's doing all the cleanup. It was kind of cool. Just textbook. And I mean, it was only one pair, but then I saw that for, from a distance for another pair. So I'm not sure how many blackbacks do this, but it's kind of cool to see males do so much cleanup and then the females sort of shaping the nest inside. Next slide. Yeah. So back to a quote that's not from Jack Cohen. It's a very, very recent publication by many authors and listed there. And you can see Jack Cohen is one of them. Oops. Yeah, almost done. And wow, this is good. Gives us some time for comments and questions. So communities and governments need to accept living with wildfire. There are ways to reduce home ignition risk. And from my standpoint, there are ways to not have to go beyond to keep what's out there intact and just focus much more on the home front. Next, I think we're done, right? So I have a lot more to share in terms of um, film clips, and of course it's impossible in a presentation like this. So I sent those film clips out. Hopefully you can take a look at it. I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. That'd be so great. Thank you so much for sharing. Great, Mason. Screen sharing is gone now. I mean, I just want to quickly touch on defensible space is something that we really like to highlight with the Wildfire Collaborative. The RCD and the collaborative have been, working on giving outreach for Ventura County to just inform our homeowners on what kind of things we can do to prevent home ignition. So this presentation was definitely very pertinent to that. But our audience may not be fully aware that you are also, have integrated art into a lot of the research and biology that you've worked on. And so I wanted to ask, when did you first become inspired to work so closely with fire-related research, and how that kind of made its way into creating art about it as well, filmmaking and writing?
Yeah, it was 2014 so I seems like it's pretty recent. So the older fires at that time, I went to some older fires like Moonlight and Wheeler Fire up in Plymouth County, Plymouth National Forest. But yeah, so um, I think what it started out, I'll be very honest, okay? So we went into a really uh, sort of a crown fire area, and it was to me a little scary initially because I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything initially as I walked in. And then there was a transition point where like a blackback woodpecker flew right up to a tree nearby. And I just thought, okay, wow. And I started realizing that, us encroaching, we were like, there was a big team of us. So obviously we're making noise. But then we saw nighthawks, we saw grosbeaks, Clark's nutcrackers, and tanagers, and the blackbacks, um, all at once. And I just thought, oh, I get it. It's it's just this is the first phase of a comeback. It's a grand comeback. And I better document it on film because so far I'm a writer, but if it's not on film, it's sometimes you're just writing about it, so it's not really being shown. So that's why I started that. And then once I finished a film about blackback woodpeckers, but also other birds. I got lucky. I got 2 goshawk nests, which is so rare, really, really hard to find goshawks. So I got to film those by going in to play in one of the forests and about 3 a.m. and putting a blind in there about 3 a.m. just waiting for the light so that I wouldn't disturb her that much because she was aware. She was if I walked in during the day, she was the first time, right? She was upset. She was so going in it in the middle of the night and waiting there till the light. That was, and then it evolved to remote cameras, which is a great way to figure out and study mammals using these burn areas. So it sort of grew and grew.
That's so great. I think that it's just so beautiful to find. I mean, obviously you were deeply inspired by wildlife, but to be able to find that relationship with like seeing life prevail within fire-stricken landscapes. And I think all of us are in the team to kind of reframe our relationship with fire in California. So it often starts with observing wildlife. So that is really great. Let me look for Here's another question. What role do community-wide efforts play in enhancing the overall defensibility against wildfires? Do you have, we can probably say something on that too, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure you all know so much about that too. And so I'm humbled by the fact that you're so dedicated here and this is your focus in the series. Just from what I know, which is amazing. There's three amazing stories that stand out. One is two are in LA, the creek fire that I showed, which was the slide from Dr. Chad Hansen. And the other one is the Latuna fire that's also been written about. It was also in LA. It was a fire permeable community, and they were so prepared that the fire just whipped right through the entire neighborhood, did not destroy. I think one house went down because a doggy door was open. That was it. Little doggy door, flames going.
It had access to have embers come inside. Yeah.
The embers. So it was really an embercast thing. And so, yeah, so and there's one in Idaho that there's a whole town. I think it's called Sakesh. I honestly don't know, and I'd love to visit it. And that's a house where they've been really strict and a big fire. It was in the 2000s. I don't know exactly when it went right through and didn't and it went right through the entire complex, the entire town actually, and not a single house went down. So I have a feeling it's where it comes to community, it's really about making sure everyone has sort of a practice that is generally accepted. And I really do believe in the 40,000 case studies here and the Jack Cohen studies there. Like, what have they seen over and over again that is like, oh, risk factor, do everything perfect, and then you have a flammable cushion outside in the lawn chair or whatever. So it's so interesting to me that that's where that community building comes in, where you've got homes close together, because it's possible to build that fire permeability, if you will, or the fact that they'll be safe. So Do you want specific factors, or is that a good general answer?
I think that's great.
Yeah, I loved your answer.
Hmm.
Mason, do you have anything you could add to it? Because
I do, but I want to prioritize. We got some questions in the Q&A, so I'll read those to you, and you might be able to read them on your own too. So from Scott Tompkinson, hi there. How risky is having a mulched area in the 30-foot buffer? Are gravel gardens a better alternative to still have green plants near the home rather than mulched gardens? Great question.
Yeah, that's a yes, because from what I've seen, right? So I'm in the process, I have to confession, I'm in the process of moving away from my HOA because they use, one of the reasons is they use wood chips. And they use, I mean, it's just not something, people are so used to it, right? They just don't think of those things. But absolutely, I do not want wood chips around me. And gravel, rock, the 5 feet sacred space for sure, but even beyond that. The cool thing to me is greater than 100 feet did not make a difference in those 40,000. That's where I want to interview Seifert and say, well, tell me a little bit more about that.
definitely. Yeah, I've also heard that, once you get past 100 feet, the likelihood of your home igniting doesn't change much, but there's a lot of recurring information, especially right now, on updating zone 0 and making it kind of across the board that the 0 to 5 feet closest to your house shouldn't have anything combustible. And it's relatively unpopular for homeowners to hear that. Many of them have rose bushes in their first 5 feet or anything, but it is one of the best advice that I think many departments and agencies are starting to put forth now to really limit your home ignition. And besides that, within the zone 1, zone 2 afterwards, 30 feet, 100 feet within your space, using mulched areas, the suggestions kind of vary from there, outside of the 5-foot zone. Some of the resources that I was looking into kind of suggest if you do mulch in a time period of the year, California can have temperate weather, but winter would be the time to remulch your garden, excluding the 5-foot zone, and maybe even a wetter part of fall so that the kind of heat in the area won't add to the ignition potential. And then if you do kind of design your garden, design it in patched spaces or mosaic spaces with some mini fire breaks in between. So the mulch question is a complicated one, but definitely something we talk about.
Yeah, I have a story related to that, just really briefly. I'm going to interview her. Her home was saved, and she actually moved out of that area. She was in Big Sur, which is closer to you. And she was in an in-holding with her family, and they didn't get the warning soon enough about a fire going. It was one of the Big Sur fires. I don't remember which one. By some chance, that spring, early in the spring, she had, I don't think she had mulched it, but she had mowed down everything in about 50 to 100 feet area, just mowed it all down. When they woke up with the fire, the house was shaking. And this is one of the few examples of somebody who's, I've got 2 or 3 of them, these stories. She said they walked outside to just watch that crown fire coming right up to them. And they said, well, this is it. It's either it's, we can't go anywhere. That's just, we can't, there was no chance of moving out of there. And she watched that fire part ways and go around the house, and then it was gone. It was, so I'm collecting those types of stories because I feel like they're really helpful to us and they're heartening because they happened and they worked. What she did worked.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very heartening and encouraging, and it's not a space where we often feel encouragement in. So very much appreciated. We have a question in the in the Q&A, and perhaps in the chat, if the attendee is still here, they can quickly define the acronyms. I just want to clarify that we have the same meaning. So we have VCFD, Ventura County Fire Department, CCC, and DF and G, which are the ones I'm not sure which we mean there, are not in sync and do not cooperate with each other regarding defensible space guidelines and requirements. How can those of us living in the WUI navigate this decades-old war? I do not use the word war lightly, as it has been and continues to be a nightmare for homeowners attempting to do the best possible these space planning and implementation. That is a shared sentiment among many residents. I think we might just need the definitions of those acronyms if you can share those.
So are these, I'm sorry, you had a lot of acronyms there. I'm just trying to figure out which ones are we looking at
Oh,
specifically?
sorry. I'm asking the asker, not you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Got it, got it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
ECC, it could be California Conservation Corps, it could be anything, and I'm not sure about DFNG. I suppose the spirit of the question could be the same. There are a lot of different programs and a lot of different agencies. Something that I interface with today is the WaterWise program that advises homeowners to put wood mulch or combustible mulch in places where I come in and I say, please don't. So I suppose the spirit of the question is, how do we navigate kind of like all of these different disalignment, California Coastal Commission, Department of Fish and Game. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. So hopefully that is clear. Did you have any thoughts on it, Maya? Maybe from your personal
How to
experience?
navigate the different
Sure.
I'm very clear on this. I want to go from success story to success story. That's the best thing we have. That's the best hope we have. And there are thousands of them actually. Like for example, the fact that a whole town was saved in Idaho, and we like it had a fire, and there's a fire history there as much as there is here. So, what is the secret? Should we talk to the mayor? So I think. Yeah, like, and the 40,000 case studies, I honestly, like I said before during the presentation, I really wish she was a little more specific, but it's cool that she had all these nuggets. Well, sorry, it's not just Seifert, it's Seifert and Keeley, both of them. It's that they've looked at 40,000 homes and they know what is good and what is successful. So I would go with, rather than trying to go with, a rule here and a rule there, what does work, what has worked, and what's going to work. So like what has worked and what has shown to save a home is most likely going to be working for me when I select my new home. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't, like, for example, the wood thing is, to me, it's really, if you have something flammable right next to your home, like the little leaves that if you go through the Jack Cohen films, he'll pick up a pile of leaves. He'll say, "Here you go. This innocent pile of leaves is going to be this. This is going to be the factor." So that kind of thing. So I wouldn't. I when it comes to the conflicting evidence, I would just go right back to the folks who have done the most work, like on the ground, house to house work. Those are the people I would trust.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it is really difficult to navigate that. There are obviously different programs, there's different incentives for homeowners for different programs. And I think that's a really good guiding principle, is coming back to the success stories and to the science. There is definitely a lag between scientific findings and then legislation or regulation, right? So that I think is something that we're experiencing too in Ventura County. With the fire department, they're working really hard to stay on top of it, but referring back to studies and that's what we're going to be listening to for the next decade. So trying to get ahead of it by looking at those resources might be a useful tool for navigating.
There's a question kind of pertinent to this, is how can homeowners assess the defensibility of their current property and make improvements if needed? This might be like, it looks like Maya's bandwidth is low, so maybe she can hear us. Oh, she can hear us. Did you have
I'm
any
sorry,
other
can you repeat the
questions?
question real quick? Sorry.
Sure. How can homeowners assess the defensibility of their current property and make improvements if needed?
Okay. Um, I think looking at all the materials of what was astounding to me about the Seifert study, Seifert and Keeley, is that it was the material of the home and the immediate 5 foot surrounding that, like, sort of the moat concept is what I call it. Like, do you have a moat around your home?
Mhm.
That seemed to be the governing factor more than anything else. Is looking like, as Jack Cohn says in his, he's like, it's the little things. So look for small things. Look for a place where something can get caught and just be an ember and just live there for a little while and then sort of catch. So all those sort of imagining those little things. I know from my standpoint, there's a chimney issue in my place, and then there's of course the wood chips that I'm not happy with. They come right up, and I have plants right next to it. It's an HOA. They're not gonna. So those are the things, and then anything eaves. They've talked about eaves. They've talked about the vents, the size of the vents. What is the size of the vents? Every single thing, even if you have gables, the gables, or sort of a structure. What is that structure called, where the wood is designed like that? I think it is called gables. I'm not sure what it's called, but yeah, I mean, like, if you have that, to have a screen on it. So all those little things is, honestly, it's really an exploration, because there's a lot of amazing material out there of people who've actually done that groundwork. So I would say looking for the little things that really make a difference. That like, if I was a flying ember, where would I go and lodge, basically, right?
Definitely. I think since we've been working in this kind of outreach and education for defensible space, I have kind of based everything off of thinking about where embers will land and ignite, and it's been really helping me kind of expand how I look at even like my home. And with that being said, like pertinent to Ventura County, we do have some agencies that offer home ignition zone assessments. So that would be the Ventura Regional Fire Safe Council and the Oak Park Fire Safe Council. And they can go like to your home and do a full assessment for you, and it's free. So that's at least like a good resource in our county for any of our participants if they want to look into that. They'll give you like a comprehensive list of some of your like ignition factors and then also suggestions on how they can be improved. So, and then yeah, Mason put the link in the chat for anyone who's interested in signing up for those. But thank you. We're at 7 now, and let's see if there's any more questions from the audience. Or Mason, you too. Open to everyone. But thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna. It's clear that I need to compile and put some more things into, send some more items to you. So thanks so much for having me.
The names, someone wrote in the Q&A for me to clarify some names. The names were the Ventura Regional Fire Safe Council. And then I also said Oak Park Fire Safe Council, but our county has a few fire safe councils. And the link to sign up for the home ignition zone assessment is in the chat. Great.
Thank you so much. That was really, really cool to hear about.
Yeah, I really look forward to like following some of your work and hearing more, because the theme I've noticed has been generally surrounding fire, but the way that you interact with your work has varied. So I'm very excited to follow you in your research and your writing. So thanks again for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And Maya, your website is just your name, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'll put-
And I'm updating it, so I got to put a bunch of little films in there.
Okay. That's awesome. I'll share it with everybody, and then when we do the follow-up of the resource share, we'll include that too, so they can keep up with what you're doing and we can watch these films that you're coming out with. It sounds like a lot of really good information.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
We can go ahead and end it. Goodbye, everybody.
Good night.
And talk to you all
Bye.
later.